Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. We're super excited to do this with our superstar mentor, Marc Nathan. My name is Ileana Gonzalez, and I'm a senior venture associate at Capital Factory. I consider my job one of the coolest ones just because I constantly talk to founders and I help source them onto Capital Factory Ventures. And so we're super excited about this event. But before we start, I wanted to give Josh Baer, our CEO, a chance to explain a little bit more about what Capital Factory is.
Capital Factory is the center of gravity for entrepreneurs in Texas. Thousands of entrepreneurs, programmers, and designers gather day and night, in person and online, for meetups, classes, and co-working. And with our team spread across the state in Austin, Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio, we meet all the best entrepreneurs in Texas and introduce them to the people that they need to meet most: investors, customers, and talent to grow their team. We watch all of this happen so that we have this unique insight into the market and use that to invest in all the best companies through our Texas Fund. And we've been the most active early stage investor in Texas since 2010.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, like he said, we have the 4 superstar cities in Texas, and they're all about 3 hours away from each other. So how great is that? Also, we're the 9th largest economy in the world, if you would just kind of put Texas on the side, which is amazing. So we're super excited about this event because it gives us a chance to dive deep into fundraising, which is, 8 out of 10 companies that come into Capital Factory Ventures come in for us to help them with fundraising. And so without further ado, I want to introduce Marc Nathan, our superstar mentor. Hey, Marc, how are you doing?
Quite well, Ileana. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Super excited to dive in. So before we start, tell us a little bit about you.
Oh, my very favorite subject, myself. From Houston originally, joined Capital Factory as one of the first 20 mentors back in 2009, if you could believe it goes back that far. Been very deeply involved with Capital Factory and really the entire startup scene around Texas for quite a few years now. My claim to fame, I think, is probably the thing that I'm most known for is I publish the Texas Squared Startup newsletter once a week. And once a month, on the first of the month, I've started publishing about 3 years ago a monthly digest of all the CPG startup activity going on in Texas called the Texas Box Startup Newsletter. So for those things, and plus a lot of events like, as I mentioned, a lot of my other things I do a lot of meetups. One of my CPG meetups has become relatively popular and it's a lot of fun. It's called the Wake Up CPG, which we do on the 4th Thursday of every month. So needless to say, I'm an active mentor. I'm very involved in the CPG market, but my day job, and I think the most relevant thing for this audience, is I actually work for a law firm, which doesn't sound very exciting, but it actually is. I'm not a lawyer myself. I have to preface that. I do business development for a startup firm, and our main focus is making sure that startups are taken care of when it comes to financings and investors and really all the major problems you need in the first few years of running your startup, all the way through some major exit issues like IPOs and M&A and things like that. So the name of the firm is Egan Nelson, EGANNELSON.com. We're based here in Austin, but we have offices all over the country, but that's not what we're plugging today. What we're here to do today is to talk about how to raise money for CPG businesses here in Texas.
Correct. Yeah, so you're the man to know in all of Texas. So
I'm a man to know, not the man to know.
So tell me a little bit about, you talk about all these type of subjects. What made you interested in CPG?
Easy. So let's level set. I don't know who exactly is in the audience right now, but I do know of all the registrations, we have a lot of really, really solid CPG companies, people I know and friends of mine from all over the country. So just to make sure that we're on the same page, a CPG is a consumer packaged good. Now, I consider the idea of a consumer packaged good as anything you could buy at Target. That includes, most people think of consumer packaged goods as food and beverage, and most people think of food and beverage plus alcohol. but there's an enormous amount of other categories. There's clothing, accessories, shoes, anything that's over-the-counter drugs, any kind of consumer electronics, any kind of thing that you buy on a regular basis that goes in your house. So it could be any kind of homewares, dishwasher detergent, whatever that might be. But ultimately, it's something that you buy on a regular basis at a store, in this case on Amazon or online, that comes in a box, and that's the package part.
Right. So, yeah.
You asked me why I got involved.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about, the CPG history of Austin,
Sure.
how you're seeing it grow through each city. I know that, San Antonio is very CPG, and consumer goods also. Tell us about the story. What have you learned these last 5 years? I know that it's grown crazily.
It has. Well, I originally got interested in CPG back in 2005, where I had a small investment group that I was running with my family, and we invested in a chocolate company of all things in Vancouver, Canada. And I didn't know anything about chocolate other than how to eat it. And I went up there and visited them, and you walk in the front door, and the first thing that happens, you get this smell, this gorgeous, beautiful, delicious smell of chocolate. And you feel like you're just about to walk into Willy Wonka. I mean, it's just amazing. And while the smell was there were no Oompa Loompas running around. But I did ask the very first question to the president. I walked in the door and I said, listen, this place is awesome. It's great. You guys are doing well. But I'm seeing all these factory workers with all kinds of chocolate just coming down the conveyor belt and putting in boxes. I said, how do you stop people from eating all your profits? It was just a very basic, very silly question. I knew it was silly. And he laughed. He said, that was the first question I asked too. And here's the answer. You don't put a limit on it. You tell everybody that works there that they can eat as much as they want. And by the second day, they're so sick, they never want to eat another piece of chocolate again. So that's when I learned that I really liked the food business. I just thought it was
Forget
clever.
fundraising, guys.
Yeah.
Look at these type of tips.
Exactly. They literally work for food. So it's just an amazing industry. It is so varied. It's one of the oldest industries in the world, but it's really not very technically sophisticated. It's a lot of people and processes that are all done on pen and paper. It's not really about scale. It's about how things taste. And I thought we might get into this later, but I will tell you the main difference that I've noticed working with CPG startups and consumer tech startups is that CPG people, their focus is to put a smile on your face, just to make you happy, to taste whatever you're tasting, to make it exciting for them. Whereas tech people, they typically want to be the smartest guys in the room. There's nothing wrong with that. We've all done it very well. And a lot of people in this room, I'm sure, have been involved with that. But CPG people just have a tendency to be warmer. And I like people that are like that. And the industry is absolutely exploding. And you asked about the history, and I can tell you, the modern history of Austin startups in the CPG space really started about 15 years ago. Sort of the first big brand that came out of Austin right out of the bat was a company called Sweet Leaf Tea, which is a ready-to-drink bottled tea. And I have a somewhat special relationship with this particular company. The founder was a guy whose name you're going to hear over and over and over again, named Clayton Christopher. And he had an idea for a down-home recipe of sweetened tea that was excellent. My personal favorite was the mint and honey. But he had been knocking around Austin trying to raise money. He raised some money from his dad's friends. He had some people in Houston that he knew, and he raised some money from them. But I remember very distinctly, he walked into the room and pitched the Houston Angel Network, where I was a member for many years. And he'll kill me if he hears this public, so nobody tell him, but he actually gave a really bad pitch. The pitch itself, he stood up, read it off of 3.5 by cards, was stiff as a board, was nervous. His first time he ever pitched a group of people. And it was a really not polished pitch. But the content of the pitch was so good, a number of us stood up in that room and said, if we don't fund this deal, if we don't write a check for this company, we should disband the organization. It was that good of a deal. And 8 months later, it took him that long to go through due diligence and process. And it turns out the managing director at the time of the Angel Network left to become his director of marketing before we closed the deal.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the president of the Houston Angel Network ended up becoming his chairman for a while, a very, very dear friend of mine and my mentor, a guy named Ben Mayberry. But the snapshot of that is that company back in, I want to say 2003 or 2004, ended up selling to Nestle, and they sold for about $225 million. The Angels that stayed in the deal got 16 times their money in like 5.5 years. Unheard of.
Yeah.
And the best part about that deal, and the one thing that I think will resonate here, is that Clayton, that wasn't a one and done for him. He took his winnings and ended up writing a check and buying a little company everybody here has heard of called Deep Eddy Vodka. And he built that, it was already doing fine, but he really supercharged it and sold it for about $600 million to Heaven Hill out of Kentucky, another spirits company.
Yeah.
And he took that money and that big win and ultimately turned it into another huge company called Cavu Ventures, CAVU, which was based here in Austin. And it was considered now one of the 2 or 3 largest VC funds that focus on CPG in the world. And we happen to have them right here in town.
Right. That's that's awesome. And it leads me to a lot of questions of like, we're seeing CPG companies struggle with that first pitch, like they're not the usual, like, let me go through an accelerator, and then learn this. We're starting to develop a little bit more of like CPG pitch training, help them understand the financial side of things, help them understand the manufacturing side, So my first question would be, you want a CPG company. What's my first step?
First step is making sure whatever you're trying to sell sells. So the parallel of a tech startup, which most of us here at Capital Factory know all about, and a CPG startup is very, very similar for the first, let's say, 9 to 10 months. It's product market fit, it's packaging, logos, it's making sure the messaging and the branding is right. In the case of CPG, whatever that might be, let's just call it a food and beverage business or a snack. The recipe has to be cooked. It has to be done at scale, and you have to start tasting it. But the minute you start diverging from a tech startup to a CPG startup, it's when you have to do something in the CPG world called co-packing, which basically means having a contract manufacturer take your recipe and make it and package it and then distribute it out to your retail, or in this case, online sales. But up until that point, very similar like every other startup, product market fit really is key. And honestly, this is actually the very best part about CPG investing, and something I've learned. I've talked to a lot of VCs in this space. CPG investing is relatively easy for one reason. If it tastes good, it's going to work. It is that subjective. And I know that sounds silly. I know there's all kinds of AI and machine learning we could do about what's the perfect storm of the right package. None of that matters.
Right.
Honestly, the companies that do well taste the best for their category. And
it's triggered by emotion, right? Also of like, my grandma used to cook this. Now it tastes the same way. Or when I was a kid, I couldn't find, oh my God. And I think about the little like necklaces right here from like the 90s, right?
Yeah.
So like it's taking you back on emotions, and then people continue to buy. So that's awesome. I got my manufacturing, I got my labels. How do and I need more capital, because then tell me how I go about it.
All right. So once again, very similar to a regular, what we would call garden variety tech startup. It's the same process. It's not easy. It's the easiest way to start a company is if you have money. And if you don't have money, then what do? Well, first things first, and I say this to all of my startups, not just CPG, you want to exhaust your personal resources. That includes things that are a little scary, like putting debt on your credit card to get the first batch of stuff done. Maybe a second mortgage on your house if that's possible, or taking a loan from real close friends and family, not necessarily friends and family around, but borrowing a few dollars to kind of get packaging done, or hiring a designer. But getting that first, I would say anywhere, call it $15,000 to $25,000. That's real money if this is just a hobby, but that's not real money if you're going to make a real business out of it.
Right.
And so if you're going to go all in and say, I'm doing this, I'm burning the boats at the shore, and I'm going to be a startup entrepreneur in the food space, the first $25,000 is probably the least amount of money you're going to spend to get the most amount of work done, which means you're going to have something that people could touch, feel, and taste.
Right.
And from there, and let's say like traditional credit cards and friends and family, the next round of funding is typically let's call it $50,000 to $250,000. And that's to maybe hire your first marketing person, or first salesperson, or first broker. And brokers are a whole different element that doesn't exist in the tech world. We'll talk about them in a moment. You have to essentially get your product in front of in front of users, in front of buyers. So the very first thing you do is you manufacture or make or cook up or whatever else, or bake whatever else you have. And then you go to a place that startups don't have. We have the farmer's market in the CPG world.
Right.
So for anywhere from 50 to $100 a weekend, you can be in front of multiple customers that are potentially looking to buy something new and fresh and local. And that is going to be your very best way to do a taste test right off the bat.
Right.
And farmers markets have popped up all over the world. We have tons of them here in Austin, some very good world-class ones here in Austin, actually.
Yeah.
And they actually add to a lot of discoverability for certain brands. So that's step number one. That takes you anywhere from 6 months to a year. You're looking at probably, I would say, once again, about $25,000 to $50,000 for inventory and all that. The best part about this is that you're actually selling while you're marketing.
Right.
You'll have people buying your product while they're giving you feedback and tasting. The next level, that first professional round of funding, which is really what we're talking about here today, is that first pre-seed round. And that could be anywhere from $100,000 to $250,000. That is money designed to actually pay you as the founder a salary, because you can't work for free. It may actually pay for a little bit of inventory. It may pay for some updated or upgraded marketing, and maybe a few trade shows like Expo or Fancy Food Show or anything like that. But that first $250,000 typically comes from the same types of angels and early stage investors that tech startups see. But once again, it's a lot easier to get people to bet on a CPG company because they taste it, they look at it, they pack it. I get it.
Right.
And that is why, by the way, you're seeing such a huge number of CPG companies being very successful on Shark Tank, because it's easy to understand the first 10 minutes.
Right. And you get real time feedback on it. Right. I mean, no, I don't think of any tech company sending 1,000,001 emails of like, fill out this another form in our lives, whereas like I'm at the farmer's market, I'm asking right then and there, and I'm taking that feedback and changing it immediately, so totally understand that. So do you mind if we take a couple of questions from the audience?
No, you don't even hear me blabbering on. I'm happy to chat.
Awesome. So, they're asking us about accelerators, and
that's your job. Go ahead.
Correct. So how many applicants does an incubator get in a given cohort? I mean, it's very different for every accelerator and incubator. So let's do an average. So how many
Texas, I'll let you answer for Capital Factory, but we can speak to, obviously this is a Capital Factory event, but we could talk about applicants for Techstars. We could talk about applicants for Mass Challenge, for Founders Institute, for all the 22 separate incubator accelerators in the Austin area.
Yeah. So to answer this question out of the Capital Factory, we are accepting about 10 now. We've changed it. It's a little bit different just because we don't call them cohorts also. They're just kind of like getting into Capital Factory. I would say, I mean, we're putting 10 that we're sure about, and now they're showcasing. Gonna go back on it. Let's say before we would get 16 companies, we would not accept about 2 of them. That's
and I can only speak for, so there is we haven't touched on it yet, but we really need to.
Yeah.
There's an incubator program based here in Austin called SKU, SKU.is, which is considered by many people, myself included, the #1 incubator accelerator for CPG companies in the world.
Yeah.
And they have 4 offices now. They're here, Dallas, they're Minnesota, and now opening up talking about Miami, but they also have a New York office. The point is that type of group for each round of cohorts, you're looking at probably anywhere from 400 to 500 applicants per city. And they can only take, just like Capital Factory, roughly 10 at a time.
Right.
I know that Techstars sees about 600 or 700 per cohort. Now they're starting a second cohort here in Austin. And by the way, and I need to emphasize this, Techstars obviously has tech in the name. It's very tech oriented. But I will tell you, for the last 3 cohorts here in Austin, they've selected 2 or 3 CPG companies each. So we've had Lives In on the clothing side. We've had a CPR wrap that helps with medical care. There's been a couple of really interesting, there's a phenomenal company, Grocery Pup, which is doing frozen food for dogs. My very favorite and the most unique out of all of them, another Shark Tank company actually, is Slice of Sauce, which came out a couple of years ago, who they're just the nicest people in the world. And but I will tell you that just like Capital Factory, a lot of the tech incubators are now realizing that CPG is open and available to them to bring on to cohort.
Right. Yeah. No, that's great. Awesome. Let me go back into our programming. What resources, events do you recommend to upcoming CPG companies to attend?
That is a very selfish question of me because I run a number of events. So I'll start with those because for me, they're most important. So first things first, it's called Wake Up CPG. You can find it on Meetup. We've been hosting it for almost 4 years now. It's a monthly in-person meetup for anybody in the CPG world, in the entire community. It's brands, it's investors, it's service providers, it's enthusiasts, just people who are interested in the space. And that is a blast. We get anywhere from 40 to 60 people. We just started going back in person 3 months ago. Even with Delta variant, we're probably going to go in person again this time, which is going to be August 26th. So that's one event you could do here in Austin. Another group of events is something that, once again, SKU, and that's SKU.is, and another very powerful, very important organization here in town called naturallyaustin.org. They both separately host separate events, and sometimes they do joint events. As a matter of fact, they have formed a coalition and now are doing their own boot camp style incubator specifically for minority owned businesses. And it's actually called M/O, and they're having their demo day on the 25th, I believe. And so those are the types of events that I go to. That's where the community congregates. Once again, once COVID is over, we can go back in person. We're going to start seeing a lot of events. Naturally, Austin does 2 or 3 events a month, and they're very educational and they're great. There was just one a couple of weeks ago about some really, really, really interesting premise here in Austin around retail and about growth and about some ghost kitchen stuff. So keep an eye on both SKU, Naturally Austin, and I do my very best to consolidate them all under the umbrella of my newsletter, which comes out once a month. And I pull in all the events from places like Joy Chevalier's Cook's Nook, which is a huge pillar of the community here in Austin. Even a guy named Max Kunnick, who everybody knows here in town, the CPG space, he does a number of events with his Tasters Club. So it doesn't take much to get involved. It didn't take me much to get involved at all. It's just a matter of knowing where to look.
Right. Yeah. So we talked about, our pre-seed rounds. Let's talk a little bit more about what happens after that. What is the approach that you would get for C-level investors if you don't have that strong of a network? Obviously we know how to get plugged in. Maybe I'm just not that outgoing person as much. What do you recommend?
So that's the perennial question for any company raising money. How do you get a warm intro to the right investor who's going to actually write you a check? That is the question that every single person on this call has asked before and will be asked again.
Yeah.
The way to do it, and this is once again a very personalized answer for me, it really is the network. It's how do you identify the right companies and how do you match with your LinkedIn profile with somebody they possibly know in order for you to get a warm intro. So if anybody doesn't know this, I'm going to say it out loud so it's not going to be misunderstood. The very best way to get investor attention is a warm introduction from a current or exited portfolio company CEO. Everything else is secondary. That's the number one. There's number 2, number 3, number 5 levels. I'm a number 4, I'm a community guy that can maybe make an introduction. That's not going to be anywhere near as powerful as somebody in an existing portfolio who likes and trusts you that makes the introduction to the partner that sits on their board. And it's not a surefire way of making money, but it's definitely not a zero.
That's a good insight. Yeah. So events help.
Show up because you don't know who you're meeting with. And the people that will introduce you to investors are not just the leaders of these organizations, it's the mentors.
Right.
The mentors are there because of their network. So networking with mentors is the most critical thing. And by the way, they didn't pay me to say this, but that is precisely what Capital Factory is all about.
Right.
Capital Factory is not about this. It's not about the events. It's not about the access to potential capital. It's the ability to talk to such a varied number of mentors in such a short period of time that no individual company outside of a group like this could ever get to in a timely period. You can meet all 260 of our Capital Factory mentors, but it would take you probably 5 or 6 years. Whereas if you did them all one by one. Whereas Capital Factory and other organizations like Capital Factory put them all in your face right up front, and you get to choose who's going to be most valuable for you at the right time.
Right. There, you said it best. I mean, do you want my job?
No, you're doing too good of a job. I could never do it.
Awesome. So we've talked a little bit too much about Austin. Tell us about Houston. What's going on there?
So I'm from Houston originally, as I mentioned. I was just back there this weekend. I had 3 phone calls with Houston today alone. I can't, it's like the Godfather 3. They keep pulling me back in. I love Houston. Houston's a great town.
Yep.
not necessarily a CPG town, and it's not necessarily a consumer-facing venture town either. There's some really, really great investors in Houston. As a matter of fact, one of the tech investors, one of the name brand, and what everybody here will know, the Mercury Fund, just put money into their first CPG company that I know of called Upgraded Salons. So no VC that I know right now is immune to doing any kind of CPG deal, even if it's not a direct deal for something like that.
Yep.
So Houston has got some really, really great companies. There's a few that I can name. I really like Chipmunk, which is a monk fruit sweetened keto-friendly cookie company.
Mm-hmm.
You've got this phenomenal Indian flavored ice cream company called Malaha. It's just absolutely wonderful. You've got a ginger beer company there. There's companies that are growing. We had a really great Trentino gelato company that sold. One of the crown jewels of Houston, and who I consider a personal friend, Lisa Pounds, had her company Green Plate Foods that ultimately sold and she became the CEO of a number of different brands, including, and this is my favorite, there's a lot of really cool brands. You make a lot more money with other things, but at one point she was in control of beefjerky.com, which is based out of Houston and obviously doing very well. But she's now moved on to a group called Accelerate 360 with a big presence in New York and San Antonio, all that. And there's just real strong executives. And I will tell you, the exits happen in Houston as well. It's really important to note a makeup company in Houston, Drunk Elephant, just sold for $750 million. Laura Mercier, another Houston-based makeup company, was run by Janet Gerwich, just sold a few years ago. But there are real businesses that are selling for real dollars that have nothing to do with tech.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to see that.
Awesome. Which leads me to a question from the audience. What events and resources would you recommend in Houston?
If this is the same Chris I know at Soft Tech, then I will tell you, go to Joey Sanchez's Cup of Joey meetup, which is a carbon copy of the open coffee clubs we do here in Texas all over. Joey, I just talked to this morning. He's great. I would start with that. We were actually doing a Wake Up CPG Houston for a while before COVID. I think we had about 6 of them, and I would go down there. They were a blast. Really enjoyed it. Snehi Chaplat, who I told you with the ice cream company, and Aaron Simpson with the beer company, the third born ginger beer. They were running it. Haven't done it in a while, but I think once COVID clears up, there will definitely be another CPG meetup for Houston and really all over, including San Antonio and Dallas, Fort Worth.
Awesome. Well, there you go, Chris. Now you know. It was Chris Howard asking the question.
Very good.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I want to get into the nitty-gritty of financials during fundraising. How accurate or how much do seed investors look into your financial plans as a CPG company, given, tell me about it.
Totally subjective on my part, but I've said this for years, and I actually came up with this. You'll appreciate this, Ileana. I wasn't thinking about it; just kind of came out of my mouth. But it was one of those things. I was sitting actually at Geekdom in San Antonio, doing the bus tour from Austin Capital Factory to Geekdom. We were looking at pitches, and I just leaned over to one of the mentors that was sitting next to me, and I said, seed investment is like betting on which toddlers will become Olympic gold medalists. You just don't know. And at the seed level, basically anything prior to real traction and Series A type financing, at the end of the day, and I've talked to a lot of investors, some investors are completely by the book on the finance side, looking at just the numbers alone. Some are complete gut check. I like this guy, will make the right thing happen. There's a blend. I believe very strongly it's bet the jockey, not the horse, which means you bet on the right people, because in the case of pre-seed and early stage investment, you can't know what the product is doing. It's not possible. Right. You don't have a crystal ball. So I think really anything in the $1 million raise and below, it's really a personal connection and a personal aptitude to the one that's getting invested in. So once again, that networking is really important, because it's not just about meeting somebody and then writing a check. It's about meeting them over and over and over again over a course of several meetings, and showing them that your business is going up and to the right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. As founders come in through Capital Factory, the strongest pitch obviously is Capital Factory is about relationship building. we're not lead investors. We are about this relationship building. And that's why we call ourselves the center of gravity for entrepreneurs, because we put all of these resources for founders in one place. And so I'm really glad for you to hear it's all about the relationships and you getting plugged in, meeting the right people and continuing to grow those relationships.
The most critical thing in the world.
Totally. Yeah, 100%. Awesome. So talking a little bit more about financial, we've heard about, should I raise $1 million? Should I raise $5 million? What's easiest as a CPG company, obviously? Yeah.
In general, asking how much you should raise is asking how long is a piece of string. The answer is it depends. I always say it's going to depend. My general feeling, and this is not true of every deal, so I'm just going to say it as a blanket statement, you want to raise roughly for 18 months of runway in general. So whatever you have right now, you have to project what your burn rate and what your needs are going to be for the next 18 to 24 months. And that's the amount of money you really should be raising. If you raise a lot more, let's say you can only spend $1 million in 18 months, but you raise $5 million, well, half that money or even more is just going to sit in the bank, or you're going to be tempted to raise or spend it on stupid things or high salaries or big parties and all that. You want to appropriately raise based on the stage of your company. And so seed round, around $1 million, that usually gets people to the first 2 years of their operations, as long as they can actually produce their product and it starts to sell through so they can actually operate on their profit and on their revenue.
Yeah.
But in general, the flip side of that is you want to raise as much money as you're comfortable with, because you don't want to raise again too soon. So try to raise as much as you can without being a pig. And that's a hard thing, because obviously, and one of the reasons why you do that, you don't raise as much as you can, you raise as much as you need, is because your dilution is going to get higher, which you don't want.
Right.
And so you don't want to give up too much of the company at the early stage, because it's very, very expensive. So you only want to raise as much as you need for the amount of time you need it, because otherwise the relationship gets skewed, which is you don't want.
Right. So it's very interesting that you bring dilution up. A lot of the conversations that we have with companies and more with CPGs, just because it's very different. It's very, financial. The topics are just very different. Tell me a little bit about dilution. So what would be...
You don't want it. That's what I know.
What?
You don't want it. That's all I know about it. No, I'm kidding.
Okay.
Dilution, basically, for those who don't know, and we can really get into this. For those who don't know, dilution is where when you wake up one day and you say, I'm going to start a company. This is before partners or anything else, and you incorporate, you own 100% of it. It's yours. It's your baby. You can do anything you want with it. It's totally yours. Nobody can tell you what to do. The minute you bring on a partner, employees, especially investors, they start taking a piece of that equity, and that equity really represents votes and what the direction of the company really is. It's really control. So ultimately, if you really know what you're doing, you want to continue to keep as much control as possible over your destiny, which means you don't want a lot of cooks in the kitchen, which is ironic for a CPG company. So you want to do everything in your power to keep as much of the equity in your pocket as possible without being greedy. It means that if somebody's going to help you build the company, you want to shower them with equity. You want to make sure they are very comfortable and they have a piece of your upside. Because at the end of the day, we could talk about all the exits and all the wins and all the investments. At the end of the day, equity is a lottery ticket. Sometimes you scratch them off and you get the real money. Sometimes you get it and you just toss it as a waste of your time. Yep. That happens in every kind of startup. But if you're giving out equity, you are essentially giving out pieces of lottery tickets. And if you know that you've got a winning ticket and you don't need somebody else to come in and pay you to buy another ticket, then keep it to yourself and do what you want with it and make as much money as you can. But smart dilution means that you know that you're going to get basically an investor for all rounds of professional investment. You're typically giving up anywhere from 20 to 30% of your company. That's what you're selling. You could sell a lot less. You could sell 5 to 10% if your deal is really hot and the market is really frothy, which is what we're seeing now in the tech world.
Right.
And if you ever were asked to sell anything more than 30%, I'm talking 35%, 40%. If you get a Shark Tank deal where they're kind of throwing that giant number out there, walk away, because they're not investors, they're predators. So it's a balance, and every deal and every situation is different, which is why I can't wave a magic wand and say this is exactly what you have to do every single time, which I wish I could.
Yeah, it's the give and take, right? Like, what am I getting and what am I giving? Awesome. So I'm going to take a question from the audience. What are some CPG wins of Capital Factory?
What a great question.
So we have a lot, actually. We're just going over them. So Marc, I mean, you've met most of them also, obviously, through your own network and Capital Factory. So let's name a few. We have Go Fish Cam.
Before we get into it, I need to give a very, very big shout out to the question asker, Mr. James Phelan himself from Houston, who's deeply, deeply involved in the Houston startup community on the tech side and a founder of a really, really interesting CPG soda on the other side. And since he's asking this question, let's give him the right answer. We don't screw around with this guy.
Yeah, sounds good. You got it.
So I think that there's a handful that I know personally that I think have done quite well. They're all early. One company I want to mention because it came out a few years ago. It's called Go Fish Cam by a guy named Brian Austin. It was essentially a GoPro that he put underwater on his fishing hook so he could watch the fish go by. And I'm not a fisherman, but it's a huge deal in competitive fishing, which is an entire industry unto itself. So he was very fortunate. He built the company, he built the product, he actually had products out there, but he had a local investor come in and buy out most of his equity, a company called Unorthodox Ventures, which is one of the 7 or 8 CPG focused venture firms here in Austin. So that was a fairly sizable win just from a paper markup from where the valuation was to where it is now. Another really interesting one, and it's brand new, it's called Pedal. Pedal, imagine a metal aluminum drinking bottle, but instead of drinking water out of it, it's these Tide Pods of hand soap. So instead of going to the store and buying all the heavy soap, which is about 80% water anyway, he's just selling you the concentrate on a subscription model. I have one in my kitchen. It's great. I think the guys are doing very, very well. So that's another interesting one. That's relatively new to Austin. One that's been knocking around for years. It actually came out of UT, and I believe it was a part of the Longhorn Startup Program, was a company that was made by athletes for athletes called Elite Sweets, which is a protein-packed donut that doesn't taste like a protein-packed donut. It tastes really good. And these guys have been knocking around. There's 2 brothers and they're a good friend, all athletes that have been knocking around and building this brand for years. One of their first big wins is that years ago, WeWork itself were doing a investment program, basically just like Capital Factory does, the $100,000 challenge. Well, these guys walked away with, I believe it was $285,000 plus a personal investment from Adam Newman himself at the time. That was a pretty big deal. And so Elite Sweets just raised another little bit of money. They're getting real distribution right now. You can see them in a number of coffee shops around town, which is great to see. And that's one that I think that, once again, they were hanging around Capital Factory for a long time and learning by osmosis until they hit it out of the park. And now they're on the escape trajectory of making a real company out of this, which I'm very excited about.
There you go. Awesome.
Those are a handful.
Yeah. Any other new ones that maybe, catch your attention? I know we have a couple.
There's one that I think is super cool, and I wouldn't call it a CPG per se, but I think everybody needs to take a look at it just because it's so interesting. It's called Now Cuisine, NOWCUISINE.com. Based out of Dallas. Guy is super, super sharp. Lloyd was basically building 3D printers and robotics 20 years ago before anybody even knew what it was. He is essentially building a chef robot where you basically put the ingredients in the top and out comes a fully plated meal right in front of your face. It's really cool stuff.
That's awesome.
So I'm really excited about that one. There's a number of others out there, and there's companies that are showing up and kind of pinging and trying to figure out what Capital Factory is and how we're doing it. There's one that came from California recently called Highwave, and they were actually the inventors of the aluminum bottle I was talking about. But the daughter of the founder has started a separate subsidiary company doing water bottles with a pet attachment so you can take your dogs out for your walk with you. And that's a very Austin thing.
Yeah, for sure. Remind me what the name of the startup that is delivering pizzas with a robot is in Austin.
I wish it were pizzas. It's not pizzas. That's not Neuro. You're not thinking of Neuro, are you?
I don't think so. But I thought I saw little pizzas flying through. So great.
That's right. So Neuro, N-U-R-O, is a robotics company that actually has struck a deal with both Domino's and with Kroger, and they are doing automated pizza and food delivery. And they're actually doing this right now in test market in Houston.
Yeah, I think it was that one. Well, anybody else hungry? Because I am anyway from hearing all these great.
Oh, I didn't tell you. I forgot to mention to anybody on this call that's still on this thing, I forgot to tell you the very, very best part about working in CPG versus working in software.
Tell
us. The packages. Every single day you open your door and there's a new package from some brand doing something.
Right.
And you don't know if it's going to be probiotic snack foods. You don't know if it's going to be hair care. You don't know if it's going to be deodorant for tween boys. You don't know. You just open up the package and there's this amazing product that you get to try and taste. And that's true across the board. I'll be very frank with you. I actually just got some very high-end men's underwear in the mail a couple of days ago for a client out of Chicago. You just never know. You open the door. I'm very fortunate. I have kids, and it's just like that's the perk of the job. They get to open up the package and see all the great products that are coming out every single day.
Yeah, no.
And you can look at me. You can tell I like to eat, so it's easy.
We all do. Well, that's awesome. You know, we're almost coming to a close, but wanted to ask you a couple more questions about the future. So, what verticals are you looking forward to in the CPG space that you're looking at?
So the traditional, let me put it this way. Traditional snack brands, the Doritos, the Pringles, all the salty snacks, all the stuff you've been eating for the last 25 years. It's on the store shelves your mom brought home. It's what you grew up with. All the little Debbie snacks, all that stuff. Every single thing. Think about, just close your eyes for a moment and think about your grocery store, your H-E-B, your Randall's, whatever that might be.
Mm-hmm.
Around the edge of the store is all your fresh foods. It's your milk, your eggs, your cheese, all the vegetables and fruits. They want to keep you out of that area. The grocery stores want to keep you in the middle because it's all the packaged goods. It's all the crackers and cookies and chips and soda. That's where they have all their margins. But here's what I'm saying to that directly. Every single brand in the middle of the store with a highly processed, ultra processed brand has what they're now calling a challenger brand, or sometimes 4 or 5 challenger brands. Mm-hmm. So every single thing you ate in your childhood, from, like I said, those little Debbie snacks to Kraft macaroni and cheese, has a healthy or better for you alternative right now. And that's a really interesting trend. So better for you is one trend. Okay. The other trend is infusion of every kind of thing you can imagine. So right now, the hottest topic is CBD and cannabis. Mm-hmm. Every single product out there is going to have some sort of bizarro world version of that thing with cannabis infused in it. Right. You're also seeing a lot of things that are just simply better for you in general. People are really starting to look at labels a lot more than they used to. Yeah. And they're starting to look for things that are completely backwards from the mind of a traditional person. And the best category I can give you is the alcohol, less alcohol. So alcohol, less spirits, the either low or no alcohol. There are mixers, there are canteen cocktails, there's all kinds of stuff that are spiritless cocktails. And because there's a whole new category of people, they're now calling the sober or sober curious. And that's an entirely brand new category of things that nobody ever even thought about 5 years ago.
There you go. You learn something new every day.
Yeah, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's all kinds of stuff out there like that.
Yeah. And, you know, being now in this environment of constantly hearing from entrepreneurs, them telling them, you know, their story, you know, I challenge everybody in the audience, you know, it's like, if you are a CPG company, start paying attention to the CPG companies that are out there in your Kroger, in your H-E-B, in your Randall's, you know, because now and I actually watched the documentary of like Impossible Burger. Yep. Guess who went to H-E-B that afternoon and like bought the Impossible Burger, you know, and like, it was amazing. So start paying attention to other people, to other products, help each other out on that end. Just because I do see, you know, a change of trend happening, and consciousness also obviously has been in the risen. So yeah, one more question from the audience, Marc. Okay. So this is from Bart Bond. Any insights on equity versus bank loans or other financing options? Example, how to fund inventory.
I'm not exactly sure how Bart got in here, but that's okay. We'll figure it out. Bart's a very, very good friend of mine. It's a great question. Thank you, Bart. I appreciate it. very simply, to answer your question, the difference between, once again, CPG and what we would consider to be traditional software is that there's no inventory to finance in software. However, there has been a brand, I was just talking about some of this yesterday. There's a brand new crop of online new banks and neobanks and lenders that are specifically focused on these types of companies. There's one called Settle.co that I met with out of California. All they do now, and I'm talking about, there's probably at least 2 or 3 dozen companies out there that will allow you to essentially give them your bank credentials and your Amazon or Shopify credentials, and they run it through an algorithm, and they will spit back almost immediately how much money they're willing to loan you on inventory. I met with a company out of Minnesota that's doing that. There's a group out of New York I know very well called Dwight Funding. There are tons and tons of these new companies that are doing specialty lending specifically for inventory finance and CPG businesses. So there's an entire category of these. Now, that's one way. The other way is that traditional banks are starting to actually lend for this kind of inventory as well, and they just do it under the general umbrella of a revolving line of credit. If you have enough inventory and you can actually take it now, there's all kinds of other specialty financing and factoring and inventory financing, and there's a whole other industry of liquidation where you're taking in, think about like Big Lot store. You've never locked into a Big Lot store where they have the same inventory twice, because what they're doing is they're taking liquidated inventory from other brands and other retailers, and they're presenting it to you. That's what TJ Maxx does. So
Right.
there's all kinds of different, very, very interesting, very sophisticated ways of financing inventory. You do not need to raise equity to hire enough people or get enough inventory in place. Bank loans and alternative lenders are really where it's at right now.
Awesome. Good to know. Awesome. Since we're in the last 10 minutes of this, I'm going to take another question from the audience. And this one is from Nellen. What are the main challenges of CPG companies once they hit the shelf?
Staying on the shelf. This is the number one category. This is the one thing that is a great question, and I have a very, very easy answer. Getting on a store shelf at all the places we talked about, Whole Foods, Sprouts, you name any retailer you want, getting there is not easy. Staying there is next to impossible. Every single investor, we really need to talk about this, but the one major metric that most professional CPG investors are looking at is what we call sales velocity. We don't have the equivalent in the tech world, but sales velocity is not just how many people bought it, but how many people rebuy it and how many people ask for it. So getting something on the shelf and getting it off the shelf in a short amount of time is the sales velocity, and that's a key metric for what most CPG investors are looking for.
How do you advise people fix it? Tell me, I mean, I've heard that CPG marketing is hell.
It's hard. It's hard. It is really boots on the ground, bare knuckle brawling every single day. So how do you do it? Let's face it. Number one, every digitally native brand out there right now, which is every brand out there right now, is pouring all of their money into Instagram and Facebook. I mean, that's it.
Correct.
So let's say 50%, 50 cents of every marketing dollar is going to go to Instagram. Let's just call it that way. The other 50% is going to be in-store tastings, which is obviously very hard during COVID, but not impossible. It's any kind of the at-home sampling. There's a lot of new companies that have cropped up where they'll send you samples of items just to test and try. My favorite being a company called firstlook.vc right now, but there's a number of others like Hindsight and a few others, or Highlight, excuse me. And I think that the very best way to really get on the store shelves is continue to talk to your brand managers at the store themselves.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Marc, we're coming up. I just want to give, we've given the insights as to how to get plugged in, where to go, what to take, funding, also fundraising. So we just want to give out our emails. We know that there's a lot of founders in the audience, and thank you so much for being here. My email is my name, Ileana Gonzalez @capitalfactory.com. Marc's is also Marc @tssquareagency.com. Hopefully we can put on the chat also. He's even given out his phone number, guys. So
yeah, I don't mind. I like to talk to startups. I like to hang out with these people. I'm just putting it there now so everybody has it. I have a couple of resources that I'm happy to share. Certainly everybody is welcome and open to the meetups, which are a lot of fun. We get a lot of work done. And the reason I do morning meetups during coffee is because if we do a CPG happy hour, and I think we're planning on one in September, depending on COVID, of course, it's probably going to be a pretty big one. Coffee, people get work done. If it's a happy hour, people are getting drinks done. It's a lot of fun, but it's not a lot. We don't remember a whole lot. So that's why I like to do early morning meetups.
Yeah. Hey, quick question. Do you recommend these companies to bring a sample at these meetups?
Always. I at this point, I'm not even asking if they're bringing a sample. I literally just say, show me, because inevitably, they pull it out of their bag, they pull it out of their purse, they pull it out something. A friend of mine went to my meetup a couple weeks ago. I guess it was the last time, so about 4 weeks ago now, and handed me a cooler full of his products. And I ate them, and they were phenomenal. It's a company called Tapio, Tapio.
Okay.
They make Brazilian cheese balls in various different flavors. They are absolutely phenomenal. The guy who runs it is great, Cristiano, but he really started at the farmers markets, and now he's in a packaged goods situation. He's selling. There's a couple companies like that here in town, Afia, that raised money and is now on store shelves doing Middle Eastern food. You've got Wonder Nuggets, who are doing a blended chicken and vegetable nugget. So it's not fully meat, but it's not fully vegetable yet either. And Hema is just doing a phenomenal job, and already in Walmart and a few others. So showing up, and yes.
Can we talk about my Hispanic superstars, Algo Dulce?
Of course. You're flan people.
Yeah, so they're flan people. I know that like a lot of, flans here in the US, even for me, I was like, that's disgusting. Like that's not even a recipe that my grandma did. And so that's how Jesse is now getting started in Austin. He's at all blue. Oh my God, the name's escaping.
The Blue Grocery Company.
Yes. I was like, where is it? Yes, I think he was about to go into Whole Foods too. So help our guys out,
I just bought a flan for him at the Lakeline market last week and the week before.
Awesome. What'd you think?
It's fantastic.
There you go. So
it's a great product. It really is.
That is the original flan, you guys. So go eat it. Awesome, Marc. Well, such a pleasure talking to you today. We know that you are the most available person in the ecosystem to ever know. So thank you for doing this. Guys, you have his email. Any other questions? I know that he's going to see an up spike in his events now because of this. Okay. Thank you for attending. To all the founders, everybody in the ecosystem. Come by Capital Factory also. We're virtual for now, right now, online, but we'll come back in person, hopefully, and so we can see them. People do drinks at Founder Salon or get stuff done at Open Coffee.
Right. Exactly.
Bye, everybody.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you all, especially Tret, for putting this all together.
Yes. Thank you, Tret. Bye-bye, everybody.